Okay, today we're going to talk about a comparison. Don't worry, I'll do a plot summary. Today we're going to talk about a comparison between McGill Root and the book of Othello. The reason I am interested in this is for a few reasons. One, some of you are my students and might know that I like to do comparative literature units, looking at books of Tanakh in comparison with seemingly wildly unrelated classic literature. And most of last year I was working on my master's thesis on two books of Shakespeare primarily, Othello and The Winter's Tale, looking at these ideas of foreignness, these ideas of otherness, of contamination of the bloodline, of people's fears of other people sort of invading their space and compromising their bodily and national integrity. So it's something that I thought about a lot and decided to look at in contrast or comparison to one of our major texts. Who knows the plot of Othello? Are we sort of familiar with it? I'll give a basic summary. It's really spectacularly bloody. Okay, so Othello lives in Venice. He's described as a Moor. A Moor has a very sort of multifaceted meaning. It suggests that he is Egyptian, that he is Turkish. Some even say that he's Jewish, but most assume that it's more Muslim. He has a lot of ideology and mythology surrounding his figure. The one thing, right, and he also suggests Turks in this time period, which were a major source of invasion and threat to the English. And even though it's not set in England, this would have resonated for English playgoers who it was written for. It would have reminded them of the international threat to their nation. None of these threads of his personality and his nationality are absolutely clear. All we know about him is that he is brown skinned, okay? And it suggests all of these different types of foreignness. So he has made his way up the ranks in Venice, which is described as the cosmopolitan society. He is an army general and very, very highly respected. And now he decides that he wants to actually marry in. And this is the problem, because you can be very well respected, and you can be accepted up to the point. But we all know that there's liking somebody, and there's accepting somebody, and then there's wanting them to marry your daughter, which Desdemona's father really, really does not. So he wants to marry one of the more prominent members of society's daughter, and here is where the problems really set in. The marriage is not accepted. It's legally accepted. It's legally challenged and it's upheld, but it's not societally accepted. And through the play you can see that it's problematic on a number of levels. Society simply does not allow this to happen. Now Iago, the main villain of the play, tries to undo this marriage by getting it to be undone legally. It doesn't work, but so transgressive is this marriage that he's able to undo it on a sort of societal level, using it to plant the seeds that will unravel the marriage. And the way he does that is to sort of convince Othello that Desdemona, his wife, doesn't really love him. How could she possibly have fallen for you? Don't you think she's going to realize at a certain point that she should marry somebody a little more like her? Don't you think she's going to start comparing you to the people around her and realize that she's made a huge mistake? And so while he can't undo it legally, he can start to undo it psychologically by getting into Othello's head, and Othello so internalizes this that he ends up consumed by jealousy.
Mr. Weinberger, please let us know where your physics class is meeting.
Consumed in a fit of jealousy, he ends up murdering his own wife and then himself. Okay, and as we'll see when we look at some of these sources, he's completely internalized this notion of himself as the other. Okay, so we will first look at these Othello sources and then sort of compare them to the root sources. So if you turn to the first page, source 1, okay? What? Okay. If anybody else needs. I forgot to mention at the beginning that I would like to dedicate this in memory of my grandmother, Rose Schulman, whose yard site is today. I think she would have appreciated it. Okay, so we're going to look at source 1. It is a little graphic. Iago here is talking to Desdemona's father. He's waking him up in the middle of the night and saying, your daughter got married, you didn't realize, and now you have to do something about it. And he says, Sir, you're robbed. For shame, put on your gown. Your heart is burst. You have lost half your soul. Even now, very now, an old black ram is tubbing your white ewe. Arise, arise, awake the snorting citizens with the bell, or else the devil will make a grandsire of you. Anybody notice the language that jumps out at them here in this characterization of the marriage? Yes?
An old black ram is tubbing your white ewe.
Yes, very graphic and very, very judgy. Okay? We have contrasts here. We have old, we have young. Young is not stated, but it's implied. We have black, we have white. Black being the obvious bad end of the spectrum. What else do we have? Anything anybody notices? What is affected, right? If you see the way Iago talks about this, he's talking about a threat to a lot of different things. You're robbed, okay? It's a theft against you. Your heart is burst. It's destroying your body. You have lost half your soul, okay? It penetrates into your most inner self, this act of theft, this act of trespass. And it's so bad that Othello is described here as the devil. He's going to make you a grandfather, okay? The devil is now your son-in-law. Now, Brabantio, that's Desdemona's father, responds to this by saying, a little later, "O treason of the blood." Okay? So treason, of course, connotes this act of rebellion, but it's treason of the blood. It's a fear of pollution. Pollution of his bloodline, pollution of his descendants. A little earlier than that, when talking to Othello, Brabantio, Desdemona's father, says, "O foul thief, where hast thou stowed my daughter?" So again, this language of theft, okay? And then he says a few other things that indicate how he feels about this marriage. "Damned as thou art, thou hast enchanted her." Okay? If she in chains of magic were not bound, okay? So he says it's impossible that she would have fallen for you if she weren't enchanted somehow, if she weren't bound by some magic that has a spell over her that's making her think that she wants this when obviously she doesn't, because she, as we see here, so opposite to marriage that she shunned the wealthy curled darlings of our nation. She never wanted to get married to anybody else. She rejected everyone. So what exactly is making her want to marry you? Well, it must be magic. It must be sorcery. Okay? And then he refers to Othello as having a sooty bosom, which is obviously not a positive characterization. So here we see again the language of theft. We see the language of encroachment. We see this added element of sorcery and enchantment, not in a positive sense, in the sense of losing the self to these forces outside of the self. Okay, so that's sort of the response of the people around him. Okay, that's the response of his father-in-law. Now Iago, when he tries to actually undo this marriage, turns to Othello and tries to make this argument that eventually the marriage is going to fall apart. And he does it in a very sneaky way. He says, I'm not saying that anything's going to go wrong. Just, like, to be bold, he says in source 4, not to affect many proposed matches of her own clime, complexion, and degree, whereas we see in all things nature tends. It's natural for her to have turned to somebody more like her, but instead she didn't. And I may fear, he goes on, her will, recoiling to her better judgment, may fall to match you with her country forms, and happily repent. Eventually, says Iago, Desdemona is going to go back on her decision. And this word recoiling, I think, is very telling, because it means to go back, right? She chose you, but she will go back on that. But recoiling also suggests the disgust that she will eventually see in him because of his difference. Okay. Othello at first does not buy into all of this. And if you look at source 5, this is in the second scene of the play, okay, when he's threatened by the marriage being undone, he says, my services shall out-tongue his complaint. It's fine, because what? What's going to serve me well?
My wife.
What?
My wife.
Not my wife, but yeah?
Military record.
My military record. It's fine. Nobody can touch me, okay? So that's what he thinks at first. And that's what he thinks in source 6 also, where he says, my parts, my title, my perfect soul shall manifest me rightly. Again, my title as a military general, my place in society, the fact that everybody knows that I'm a good person, okay? Nobody can affect me by this. But then, after Iago starts to get into his head, and after he starts to say, maybe eventually she'll go back on it, Othello starts to internalize the characterization of himself by somebody else. Would anybody like to read? Go ahead. Source 7.
My name, that was as fresh as Diane. Diane's
It's a shortened version of Diane.
visage is now begrimed and black as mine own face.
Okay, so how's he talking about himself now?
Starting to see it as negative.
He's starting to see his blackness as negative. I used to be, right, he says, my name that was as fresh as Diane's visage. Now, this refers to Diana, goddess of the moon, and the whiteness of that, okay? So my name used to be white, even if I was black, but now, even my name is starting to turn as black as my face, which obviously, according to everybody else, and now according to Othello too, is a negative thing. Okay, so that starts to happen when Iago starts making his insinuations. Now, a little background. Anybody know how Othello won Desdemona over, if you read the book, if you read the play? They used to sit around for hours and he would talk about how he had all of these feats of glory. He would tell her stories of escape and battle and meeting giants and meeting all of these creatures from foreign nations and how he overcame all of them. So he was a storyteller. And he wooed her that way. And she says, I loved him because he shared all of these things with me. And so it's kind of funny that once these insinuations start to take hold, Othello actually says, he sort of turns on himself and says, happily for I am black and have not these soft parts of conversation that chamberers have. What can't I do well, he says. What does he lack in his own characterization? Conversation skills, which is a funny thing to say when your entire relationship was based upon storytelling. And so he started to see that maybe himself, maybe in his own eyes, he has some sort of defect. And then he refers to the age problem also. Or for I am declined into the vale of years. Okay, it's all starting to seep in. I'm old and unrefined, just like you think. Then, at the play's very, very bloody ending, when he kills himself, he has already killed Desdemona for fear that she has betrayed him. Before stabbing himself, he says, I want you to tell everybody, he's talking to his generals, he says, I want you to tell everybody what happened, okay, what happened here. Say besides that in Aleppo once, where a malignant and turbaned Turk beat a Venetian and traduced the state, I took by the throat the circumcised dog and smote him thus. Who's he talking about? He's talking about himself in a sort of out-of-body experience type way. Talk about this turbaned Turk who's now him. And that's the worst characterization you can have in this society, to be a Turk, to be a foreign invader. And that's what he is now. Okay? And so he talks about himself killing that person, and then he stabs himself, having completely absorbed the views that other people have imposed on him. Okay, that's Othello in a nutshell, viewed through this particular lens of characterizing Othello and him absorbing that characterization into thinking that he is a terrible person, as expressed by the color of his skin. Okay, it's kind of a strange foil for McGill-Out Root. The reason that I'd like to compare it or contrast it with McGill-Out Root is to show us these moments of foreignness, to look at the moments of foreignness, of strangerhood, and to draw out the idea that it's actually a little bit surprising that everything worked out. I want to focus not so much on conversion, but on foreignness, and to see these moments where people are in crisis, where people are dealing with their identity being lost or changed, okay, and how that affects their acceptance of themselves, how that affects their acceptance into society. Okay, so we'll turn now to the sources on McGill-Out Root. Let's look at source 10. Can I have another volunteer? Molly?
Yeah, sure. ויהי בימי שפוט השופטים, ויהי רעב בארץ, וילך איש מבית לחם יהודה לגור בשדה מואב, הוא ואשתו ושני בניו. And it came to pass in the days when the judges judged, that there was a famine in the land, and a certain man of Bethlehem in Judah went to sojourn in the field of Moab. he and his wife and his 2 sons. V'shem ha'ish Elimelech, v'shem ishto Naomi, v'shem shnei banav Machlon v'Kilion, Ephraim mibeit Lechem Yehuda. Vayavo sdei Moab vayusha. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of his wife Naomi, and the name of his 2 sons Machlon and Chilion, from Ephraim, Bethlehem in Judah, and they came into the field of Moab and continued there. Vayamat Elimelech ish Naomi vatishaer hi ushnei banah. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband died, and she was left and her 2 sons.
Good, thank you. Okay. How are people described at the beginning of this? What are some of the characteristics that we know about them? Philip?
Elimelech and his family are from Yehuda. They're from they're
Okay, so
Israelites,
we know where
obviously.
they're from.
And
Okay.
they're now they're living or temporarily living in Moab.
Why do you say
foreign
that they're
country.
temporarily living there?
Because sojourn, which would be lagur.
Okay,
So-
because of the word lagur.
Yeah.
Okay, good. So you may recognize that word from the word that describes the Jewish people going down to Mitzrayim. The Haggadah Shel Pesach points out that it was not lihishtakeh. It was not like to set down roots. It was just to sort of be there for a while. So we know where they're from, and we know that they had an intent. It was what was intended to be a temporary sojourn. Yes.
But we also know that it ended up becoming something more permanent because it says Vayisham, and they continued there, showing that they made the permanent decision to stay there.
Okay, you think that that suggests permanence, the fact that it says, and they were there. Okay, they existed there for a while, probably. Okay, do we know their names?
No.
We know their names, that's true. Okay, and then once setting down these roots happens, okay, Elimelech dies. And what's emphasized in the text here in Gimel is that he is Ish Naomi. He is her husband. And without him, she has now begun to lose a little bit of her status. They've already lost some status by having to leave home, okay? And now she's losing a little bit more, which the pasuk emphasizes where it says, "Vatishaer hi ushnei banah." She's left. She's left alone. And now this transformation into foreigner begins for her. Okay, let's look at source 11 now. Gal, would you read, please?
Sure. ויסולהם נשים מאביות, שם האחד ארבע ושם שני רות, וישבו שם כעשר שנים. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The names of the one was Orpah, and the name of the other Ruth. And they dwelt there about 10 years. וימותו גם שניהם מחלון וכיליון, ותישאר האישה משני ילדיה ומאישה. And Machlon and Chilion died, both of them, and the woman was left of her 2 children, and of her husband.
Good. Okay. The process continues here. How do we see it continuing, this process of becoming foreign and becoming different from before?
She loses her name.
She loses her name. How does she lose her name? Where do you see it?
It says, and she was left, and the woman was left of her children, of the 2 children of her husband.
Good. So she's described in Hay without a name. She's now left alone, this woman, okay? And so if we're talking about degrees of foreignness here, we're now, we had a loss of status from before, and it's impossible to ignore that there is an otherness, a foreignness that is characterized by gender in this book, okay? It's sort of a quiet, desperate theme that runs through the entire book of the helplessness of women by themselves in this society. Okay, and we'll see it as we move forward also, but right, she's left alone, this abandoned woman in this land. Her name is now starting to slip off of her as well. Okay, so that is the setup in Moab of Naomi's foreignness. And as we'll see, it gets worse even as she tries to make it better. Because if you turn to source 12, which is basically the rest of Parak Aleph, okay, she got up. Why? Lashuv el Eretz Yehuda, to go home. Because the famine is better now and it's time to go home. So scan through this parak. We're not going to read the whole thing out loud. And I've bolded for you the fact that the attempt to return appears so many times in this parak that it seems to be the theme of it. Trying to go home. Trying to go back to what you had before. Okay, but of course she can't. She can't go back to the way it was. She's lost her family. She has lost so much by this sojourn. Okay, scan through this and see what you can see about her foreignness in this text. In what ways has she been abandoned, and in what ways is she despairing? Any ideas?
It looks like she is saying to them, you have a place. You know, you have a country, you have family. You should return to your country. But you don't have the sense that, you know, she is optimistic about her return to where she's going.
Excellent. Okay, so talking to her daughters-in-law, she says, go home, okay? It's going to be better for you. It'll be better for you societally. It'll be better for you financially. You can just go home to your families, okay? But she's not at all optimistic, as you said, about what happens if they come with her. And if you look at Yud Bet, okay? Shov navanotai, go home, okay? Lechna, kizakanti miyod leish. What's her point here? What is the thing that she says to them above all? What can she not provide them with? She cannot provide them with husbands. She cannot provide them with financial security or with a clear place in society. Because if they go back and they do not have that connection, okay, they do not have that connection of somebody who is in her family and somebody male who is in her family, she can't give them the stability that they would presumably want. Okay, the threat of poverty here is enormous, but also the threat of a total lack of status is very, very important.
But it seems to have nothing to do with their nationality. It's not like she's saying you won't be accepted because you're Moavi. It's all to do with not having a husband and, you know, that you have it better off here. But it's not like saying, you know, you'll never be accepted there because you're an outsider.
It's true. I don't think that she emphasizes it so much, although we do see, like in Yud, oh, never mind, it's not there. When she says in Tet Vav, when she's trying to convince Ruth to go back, she says, Shava yivimtech el alma ve'el Eloheha. So there is something of that. It'll be easier for you to go back to that, but you're right, I think the emphasis is the financial desperation that they will have in this new place. Okay, so she is describing all of these difficulties that she will encounter, and if you look down until the end, to the end of this parak, okay, in Kaf. Miri, would you read Kaf, please?
So, and she said unto them, call me not Naomi, call me Mara, for the Almighty hath dealt very bitterly with me.
Okay, so what's she saying here? She's changing her name. She's changing her name. Where before her name was starting to slip off of her, maybe even in her own eyes, here she's making it official. And it's not really official because she'll be called Naomi later again. But she's explicitly stating that she has changed profoundly to the extent that she wants to change her name. Why? Because what has happened to her? God has embittered her, okay? So it's not just that she's been abandoned by everyone in her family, it's that she's been abandoned even by God. Okay, and she really makes that point clear in Kaf Aleph, where she says, Ani mele'ah halachti v'rikam heshivani Hashem. I went full and I have returned empty-handed. Okay, why would you call me Naomi if God has been so bad to me? Okay, so like in Othello, we can see this internalization of otherness. She has changed really profoundly from a woman of probable status to a woman coming back empty-handed, bereft of her family, and seemingly starting over. And there's sort of like there's a chorus, right? There's like a chorus in Megillat Rut of the judgmental village women who stare at them and say, who is this? This isn't the person that we thought it was, right? In Yutet, Vatayom kol ha'ir aleh, and everybody's sort of really shocked. Vatomar hazot Naomi, is that really you? Because she's changed so profoundly. They don't see her as the same person. They see her as somebody else. I enjoy the judgy chorus of women throughout this book. Okay, so she's sort of undergoing this transformation. At the same time, there's a transformation in this parak of Ruth as well, okay? Where Ruth is not becoming foreign because she lost everything, although she too underwent loss, Okay? She is changing everything almost seemingly on purpose, and in so doing takes on the status of foreigner as well. So what does Ruth do in this parak famously? She goes with Naomi. Why? What is the point of that? What does she gain from doing that?
What remains of her family?
Okay, so maybe it is that. Holding on to what remains of her family, her mother-in-law, while not a blood relative, is a close tie to what came before. But presumably, she has another family also, right? The family that came before that. Her own parents, her own extended family, all here in Moab. So what would possess her to give that up, to go to a foreign place where she will have nothing? Any ideas?
She just,
Yeah.
she wanted to stay Jewish, assuming that she did, let's say she did convert
Yeah.
before. She wanted this Jewish life. I mean, that's, I think, why we put Ruth on this pedestal, because she was someone who had nothing to gain, and it was like completely lishma.
Good.
There was nothing there.
Good. Rachel?
I wouldn't call it Judaism. I would just call it that she wants to stay with Naomi. Because then she says, and then I'll take on your people, and I'll take on your God. All those things come after, but there's a connection between her and Naomi that she wants to keep.
Okay, it's a familial connection, and it's maybe a connection to God, a connection to Judaism. It's possible that she converted before, it's possible that she didn't, and she converts now, okay? But either way, there's something pulling her in, because again, she doesn't seem to have any personal, financial interest in doing this.
But it's personal
Yeah.
loyalty. She seems, I mean, it's Naomi.
Yeah.
That's the draw.
Yeah.
You know, somebody said, so.
Good. Yes.
It could even be kindness because she has compassion for Naomi. She knows that Naomi would be worse off by herself than with her help.
Okay. So, all of these things I think are part of the picture. Okay? It's this connection to Naomi, it's this connection to Judaism, and it's perhaps even taking on the idea of foreignness onto herself to relieve it from her mother-in-law, okay? And so we see her dramatic speech where she says, I will stay with you, don't try to make me go back, I will go wherever you go. Okay, and at the end in Kaf Bet, what's Ruth called? Now she's Ruth HaMoaviyah. She's taken on this moniker. It's the first time that it appears, and it will stay with her until the end of the Megillah when she marries Boaz, thus granting her legitimacy within the nation of Israel. Okay? But right now, she sort of absorbs that foreignness into herself such that when she returns to this place, well, not returning in her case, when she goes to this place, she is the foreigner, and it deflects, I think, a little bit of it from her mother-in-law. Or you could say that it highlights it because not only are the people saying, is this the Naomi that we thought, but who is she with, right? She's with this foreign person. Yes?
And also the fact that she is from Moab, and there's like questions, I guess, halachically with like Moabites being in like the Israel nation. So
Yes.
I think specifically not just that she's a foreigner, but that she is from Moab is like also the issue here.
Right, because Moab itself has extra reasons why they should not join Am Yisrael. Good, yes.
I think also just like emphasizing the fact that it's like we're speaking about like where she comes from, like the Moabites. It's like kind of explaining like to whom she is foreign, because like you kind of see like the transition between the words like of her relationship with Naomi, and like Pasuk Chet you see that it's like Kalotel, like her daughters-in-law, and then later on you'd bet it's changed, it's been on tie, and then it kind of goes back to this like clearly like daughter-in-law and daughter have like very different connotations, and like yes we are using that foreign term from the beginning, but we're adding another word in here and we're saying like Moab, so like it's kind of this, I feel like it's maybe this process like they created this family like together, and then only then could she like fully separate herself from everyone else.
Good, excellent. Did you want to add also?
It was similar, I think, in what she was saying, that it also reflects how she perceives herself. That she had undergone whatever change it was, that she did not feel able to revert back to her private life, or her prior life. And that by staying here is that, well, you know, I'm changed, I'm nishtahin and nishtaher, I'm in the middle, but it is more hurtful or difficult to go back. I'm going to go forward because I think nowhere, at least we'll be nowhere together than to go back there and really be alone.
Right, it's entirely possible that if she had tried to go back to her own family, she would be known as the Jew there, or the Israelites, okay?
Yeah.
And in the lands of Israel, she is known as the Moabite, which is kind of ironic since she just underwent this big transformation, this big declaration of commitment. She's still a Moabiyah, and that's why I'm saying that when I'm looking at these texts, I'm not focusing so much on that conversion piece per se, and more on just the experience of the foreignness, of being different, of trying to adopt this new culture and all of the difficulties that it presents. And the difficulties that other people feel faced with this other type of person. So she gets to Eretz Yisrael with her mother-in-law, and now she has a multifaceted foreign experience, okay? She is culturally / nationally different. She is economically disadvantaged. She is an unattached woman here, okay? And she has all of these threads of foreignness that we see in Perek Bet. If you turn to source 13, which is the majority of Perek Bet. Okay, so they get home and basically they have to figure out how to eat, okay? So it turns out that they have a relative. What's the relative's name?
Boaz.
The relative's name is Boaz, and so Ruth goes to his field to try to get some sustenance for the family. Okay, what do we see in how she describes herself and how she behaves in this perek? Anybody see anything? Nodding.
She asks Boaz, why, in verse 10, why have I found favor in thy sight? מדוע מצאתי חן בעיניך להכירני ואנוכי נוכרייה?
Right.
Why are you being so nice to me and I'm a stranger?
Why are you being so nice to me? I'm a foreigner. And it's so sad, right? She has such low expectations, which are probably in line with what is reasonable to expect of people. She needs to rely on the kindness of others, which she honestly doesn't really expect very much. I mean, we saw the cliquey women at the beginning, right, saying, who is this? And she doesn't expect much, and she describes herself even as a foreigner. What else do we see here? She has to go to this field and try to collect the leftover sheaves, okay? She needs to take what is reserved for the poor. So it's a very disadvantaged place to be in. And Boaz turns it around in all of these different ways, okay? He presents kindness to her on a number of levels. One is that in Chet, okay, he tells her to stick with his people and his field. She doesn't have to wander around, okay? He tells his men not to bother her. He tries to make her feel welcome there. He says that she can take from the regular things with the regular gatherers. She doesn't have to wait for the things that are left over for the poor. And he also invites her to lunch with everyone. So that really elevates her and addresses a lot of these areas of foreignness that she would feel. How does he characterize her? Look at Chet. Calling her his daughter, which is very, very different from her own self-characterization of Nochriya, where he is embracing her as part of the family. Okay? And that happens on a number of levels, as we said, but even with this language, it's reinforced that she is meant to be included here. Now, there is a connection between Boaz and Ruth. She's described as an Eshet Chayil, and he's described how? At the very beginning, in Aleph, Ish Gibor Chayil. So there's something that connects them in the way that they are portrayed in this book. We know that in some ways they are meant to be the heroes of it, not least of which because their line eventually leads to the dynasty kingdom of Israel. Okay, but they're connected on a linguistic level as well. They're connected on a conceptual level as well as a linguistic level. Okay, so let's turn to Perek Gimel. Okay. Boaz decides that he's going to marry Ruth, and the way he does this is through the process of Geulah. Now, it's not the only type of Geulah that we have in the Torah. The Geulah that happens here is redeeming the field, is pulling somebody out of financial distress. What other types of Geulah do we have?
Pardon the interruption. 9th and 10th graders, please join us in the Beit Knesset right away.
We also have the concept of Geulat Dam, which happens when somebody is killed accidentally. It's presumed that their relatives are angry enough or threatened enough that they will want to avenge their blood, and they will chase after the accidental murderer. Okay, to the extent that it's a requirement of the Torah that in every society there needs to be an Ir Miklat, so that if somebody kills somebody accidentally, they have a place of refuge. Why? Because this notion of Geulat Dam is so important that we are actually afraid that their life will be in danger. It's sort of a foreign notion to us, okay, that we will have family members chasing after somebody to kill them, as much as we can understand this feeling of revenge. But really what it's about is this notion of the family integrity. Okay, and when, especially in a group of people that's more tribal than we are now, when somebody threatens your family integrity, you maintain the family integrity by demonstrating that you cannot do that to this tribe, to this group, okay? It's sort of just keeping the family unit more intact from this breach that it had. So similarly, when it comes to the Geulah in a financial sense, it's restoring the family integrity. And so, when given this obligation/option to redeem this part of the family, Boaz is pulling them out of economic distress, and you could say that it's even sort of more heroic than this idea of being a Goel Hadam, because the impulse to revenge is so strong, but the impulse to bail somebody out of financial distress is not necessarily as strong. And so we see, though, that the impulse for him was very, very strong. I'm actually going to skip ahead a little bit. Actually, not. We'll look at Gimel for a second, the beginning of Gimel, okay? After Boaz tells Ruth to sort of stay the night, but doing it in sort of a way that nobody will suspect anything, he makes sure to send her home with food so that she's not empty-handed. So on the one hand, alleviating the immediate need of providing them with food, okay? And then he decides to marry her and also redeem all of the property that was associated with Elimelech's family. The other characters in this Megillah are often seen as the regular people, as opposed to the extraordinary people of Boaz and Ruth. And so as sort of a contrast, the person who was closer in line to redeem this field is who? He's known as Ploni Almoni. He is not given a name. And right, we know that names are sort of important here. We'll see at the end, okay, if you look at the bottom of Dalet, I think this is your last page, right, where Ruth sort of makes it, it says, Crash Shem B'Veit Lachem. Right, you're going to have this sort of name for yourself. And so the fact that he's deprived of a name is important. And if you look at what he says, when Boaz says, I want you to redeem this field, you are first in line before me. In Vav, the Goel, Ploni Almoni, says, Lo uchal li, pen ashchit et nachalati. Why? Why doesn't he want to do it? I will destroy my nachala. I will destroy my sort of portion here. Now, what does he mean by that? Some say that he was already married, and as we know from double wife situations in Tanakh, that doesn't always work out so well. That would be a legitimate reason to not want to do this. But the language is actually helpful in the English, in 6, if you see, lest I mar my own inheritance. There's a problem here of marring his family line, of polluting the bloodline, of changing things irrevocably because of this foreigner who's trying to invade his world. And we can understand where he's coming from, but that's why he's regular and Boaz is extraordinary in taking on this, for lack of a better word, burden. And when Boaz does this, he's not unaware of what he's doing, because he says, in Yud, Gam et Ruth HaMoaviyah kaniti li b'isha. He is fully aware of what he's doing by taking this foreigner on into his family unit. Okay, it's not just about the financial situation. It is about bringing this person who has a lot of doubt surrounding her, right? You mentioned the halachic doubt surrounding her, bringing her in as part of the family unit. And so as I mentioned briefly before, finally the people sort of accept them, okay? And they give her this blessing.
Members of the Respect Committee, we are having a meeting today during lunch in the library. Now, because of the different programs that are going on during Mechanechet versus lunch, there will be 2 meetings. There will be a 9th and 10th grade Respect Committee meeting for those of you who have lunch during one period, and there will be an 11th and 12th grade Respect Committee meeting for those of you who would have the program during the other period. I'm trying to accommodate everyone and show respect for your needs. Thank you.
Okay, so that brings me to the last point, which is that the connection between Ruth and Boaz, this aspect of Chayil, of Eshet Chayil and Gibor Chayil, I think has more to do, has a lot to do, not only with the kindness aspect, not only with looking out for other people, but this ability to absorb otherness and others into the community. Ruth in taking on sort of the burden of her mother-in-law by being with her, in becoming Ruth HaMoaviyah, okay, and Boaz in taking this risk of bringing in a woman who is totally foreign and totally suspect even into his midst. And I find this to be very powerful and very shocking, considering how people sort of naturally react to people who are different from them. Okay, and so in thinking about this message and in thinking about the fact that the Torah tells us over and over again, you were strangers, you were strangers, you were strangers, I think it's about more than empathy, and it's about more than making sure that people are taken care of. It's about using your community to embrace rather than to distance. And I think that's what we see here. And if we think about how terribly it went in Othello, it's even more remarkable than before. So thank you for listening. Thank you.